Hey everyone, Khalid here from Wise Guys Tutoring. Welcome to our first video on the QUDRAT test, aka the General Aptitude Test, or GAT for short. We'll be solving 5 questions from the math section, or the official sample questions that are provided by the ETEC. So they're the administrators of the test. Along the way, I'll be giving you an explanation of the topics themselves and plenty of tips, tricks, and techniques to help you do absolutely amazing on this exam. Let's get started. Okay, so this question says a student bought 15 pens at a price of 3 riyals each with a 10% discount on the total price of the pens. How many riyals did he pay for them? So this is a two-part question basically. First of all, he buys 15 pens at a price of 3 riyals each. So what we have to do is multiply those, right? So it's 15 times 3 riyals each. How do we multiply this? The best way would be to do the columnar multiplication. So you go 3 times 5, you start here. 3 times 5, hopefully you know that from your multiplication table, that's 15. But of course we can't put 15 here, we have to carry that 10. We put the 1 over here on top of the 10s. 3 times 1 is 3, and then because of this 1 here, you add it on to the 3, becomes 4. So 3 times 15 is 45. I'll give you a little second option if you like. If you want to do this mentally more or less, 3 times 15 can be broken down. You got to break it down if you want to do it mentally. So 3 times 15 is actually 3 times 10 plus 3 times 5. Now why am I taking 10 and 5? Because that makes 15 together. And 3 times 10 is pretty standard. It's pretty simple. You just put a 0 on the end of that and that becomes 30. And again, 3 times 5 is just a multiplication table. We know that's 15. So together that gives you 45, which is the same answer. So he's paying 45 riyals, but hold on, this guy's a very lucky guy. He gets a 10% discount on the total price of the pen. So what we need to do next is we need to figure out what is 10% of 45, because that's going to be his discount, right? Anytime you're doing percentage of a number, you need to multiply that percentage by the number, and the percentage is, if it's 10%, that means it's 10 over 100 times 45. Okay, I'll give you guys the shortcut in just a little bit, but this is any percentage they give you. If you want a percentage of a number, this is how you can do it as best as you can. And whenever you're multiplying these, this is a fraction, right? And this doesn't look like a fraction, but whenever you don't see the denominator is just 1. So here what you'd have to do is say 10 times 45, which is 450, over 100 times 1, which is just 100. And whenever you're dividing by 100, all you're doing is taking this decimal point and moving it twice. So this will become 4.50. And that is his discount, ladies and gentlemen. So if he's paying 45 and that's his discount, we'll just subtract them to get the total that he pays. But before that, let me give you a little shortcut for 10%, okay? 10% is 10 over 100, that is true, and you would have to multiply it by 45. But here's the thing, 10 over 100 is just 1/10. It's just 1/10, right? 10% is 1/10 of something. And 1/10 of 45 basically just means divide it by 10. And we know how to divide by 10 very well. Instead of moving it twice, you only have to move it one time. This would just be 4.5. And of course, we put a 0 because when you're dealing with money, you always go to the penny. So if you want to remember this shortcut, 10%, you just divide your number by 10. That gives you 10% of your value. Now, for the final step, right? The final step is he pays 45, or that's full price rather, 45, and you need to subtract 4.50. So whenever you're doing a subtraction like this with decimals, if you don't have decimal places, that just means they are zeros, but you need to put them so that it's nice and aligned, okay? So we start here, 0 minus 0, that's just 0. 0 minus 5, well, he can't afford it, right? So what he's going to do is he's going to say, hey neighbor, can I borrow a 1 please? And the neighbor says, yes, sure, go ahead. And he becomes 10. So now what you have here is 10 minus 5. And 10 minus 5 is very doable. That's just 5. We keep the decimal where it is. It's nice and aligned. 4 minus 4 is 0. And 4 minus nothing, the 4 is just there. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what he's going to pay in the end, is 40.50 riyal, which means the answer is B. There is, of course, a different way of doing this percentage, so I'll just share it with you in case you're curious. If you're saying you want to take 10% off of something, that almost means like it's 90% on if that makes sense. 10% off means it's 90% on. And if you want to find out 90% of 45, well, you do the same thing, right? 90% of 45 just means you're going to do 90 over 100 times 45. And if you do these multiplications, you will certainly get the same answer. If you're not comfortable doing this kind of thing using what we call the multiplier, you can certainly do this technique, of course. 10% of 45, that's just 1/10. You just divide it by 10. So even if they give you questions where they say, for example, 20%, so all you'd have to do is find 10%, which means divide your number by 10, essentially, like I showed you the shortcut here. And then if this is 10%, then 20% would just be double that, and 30% would just be 3 times that, and even 5% would just be half of this. So if you can find 10%, you can kind of create these blocks that you can add up to get any percentage, whether it's 20 or 30 or 35 or whatever it may be. Okay. Otherwise, of course, the best way would be to use the multiplier, and I'll cover that a little later in a different question. Let's move on to the next one. This one says 3 workers received a daily wage of 180 riyals. So that's total for the 3. The first received 60 riyals. If the third worker worked half the numbers of hours that the second worked, and the hourly wage is the same for the 2 workers, how many riyals did the second and third worker receive? So it's pretty wordy, but basically they all received 180 together. We know the first guy received 60 riyals. So how much is left for the other 2? Let's see. 180 minus 60. So 0 minus 0 is 0. 8 minus 6, that's 2. 1 is left alone. So there's 120 riyals left for the other 2 guys. But you see, they didn't work the same amount of hours. They have the same wage, but it says that the third guy worked half the number of hours of the second. And what that tells me is that the third worker is going to get half the amount of money that the second worker worked. That's how it is if life is fair, even though it's not, but that's a whole other topic. So how about we do this? Let's say the wage of the third worker is X. Let's say X, because when you don't know something, you know, in math, we're trying to form an equation, basically. We're just going to call it X for now. X is the amount received. This is my handwriting, by the way. It's not fantastic, but hopefully you can manage. By the third worker. Okay. So what would be the amount received by the second worker? Well, he worked twice as many hours, right? That means 2x. That's the amount received by the second worker. There you are. So then together, we know they're supposed to have 120. So if this guy is x and this guy is 2x, and together they make 120, here's the equation that we can formulate. The third worker plus the second worker together get 120 riyals. So x plus 2x, that's the total together. We can add these because these are called like terms. As long as you have the same exact letter and you have the exact same exponent, then you can add them like apples. This is just 1 apple plus 2 apples. And please don't think this is 0x because there's no number, right? When there's no number, it just means that the number is actually 1. Okay? So 1 apple plus 2 apples, you get 3 apples equals 120. Now, if I want to get x alone and x is being multiplied by 3, I need to do the inverse operation to find it. What is the inverse? What's the opposite of multiplication? Well, that would be division. So we need to divide by 3. And since it's an equation, this is like 2 jealous siblings. And this guy says, me too, me too, me too. You have to give him the exact same treatment, the exact same thing. So now multiplying by 3 and dividing by 3, well, they undo each other. 120 divided by 3 is 40. And we can divide in order to find it. So you set it up like this. This is 120 divided by 3. When you're doing this long division, you ask yourself, how many times does 3 fit into 1? Well, it doesn't, right? It fits in 0 times. So then that would be 0 because we're not subtracting anything. We're not doing anything yet. That's 1 minus 0. And then you bring down your 2. Now you ask yourself, how many times does 3 go into 12? Well, let me see. There's 3, 6, 9, 12. It goes in there 4 times to reach 12. The number that you're subtracting here is the number that you counted up to. Like, how did I know that it goes in 4 times? It's because I counted 3, 6, 9, 12. That means it goes in there 4 times and it makes 12. 3 times 4 is 12. Just like earlier, 3 times 0 is 0. That's where these numbers come from. The number that you subtract is the number that you count up to. Is basically the number here 3 times the number that you've managed to fit in there. Now 12 minus 12 of course is 0. But the problem's not done because you still got to keep going and there's a 0 over here. Now the question is, how many times does 3 fit into 0? It doesn't. It fits in 0 times. And again, you subtract 3 times 0 to give you 0. That means there is no remainder, there's no numbers left, and your answer is definitely 40. So x is equal to 40. Now you always got to ask yourself here, you always got to ask, have I answered the question? They ask, how many riyals did the second and third worker receive? If I have found x, well, I've only found one of them. I found the third worker. The third worker got 40 riyals. What about the second worker? Well, he was 2x. 2x means twice as much as this guy. So this guy got 80 riyals. And just to be sure, in case you're doubting it, 40 plus 80 was supposed to give us 120. And it does. And that's how we can be sure that we're correct. Okay? So third worker gets 40, second gets 80. That would be D. That would be your correct answer. If you're not too comfortable with some of the algebra that we did here, I'll put the link to a previous video where we solve 1-step, 2-step, and even 3-step equations. I really recommend you get really solid with algebra because it's so foundational and it's found in so many problems. Okay, let's go to the next one. This question says, Badr sold a plot of land for 200,000 riyals. If his profit on it was 25%, how many riyals did he pay? You see, I told you we're going to get back to these percentage question. But for now, we're going to do the real deal. We'll do the real percent increase decrease method, which works best. And it looks like this. You take the original value, you multiply it by what we'll call the multiplier. And that gives you your final value. Okay? What is this multiplier, you ask? Well, the multiplier is always 1 plus or minus the percentage as a decimal. And I'll show you what that means. So in the earlier question, for example, he had a rebate, a discount of 10%. So what is 10% as a decimal? 10% as a decimal, you just have to put the percentage literally over 100. That's what percent means, per 100. And you get this as a decimal. Now, if you're dividing by 100, you move the decimal point 2 times, and that gives you 0.1. Now, the second part that might be tricky to you or new to you is the plus minus. Plus or minus, what I mean is sometimes you're adding a percentage, right? Sometimes you pay something like a tax, or sometimes you're gaining interest or something, you're increasing by some percentage, then you would add this percent as a decimal. In the case of a rebate, you would actually subtract it. That's why in the previous example, if you want to scroll back even, I did 0.9, right? Because it would have been 1 minus 0.1. That gives you 0.9. So plus or minus depends if you're adding or you are removing this percentage. Okay, so back to Badr. He had a land and he sold it for 200,000 and they're saying his profit on it was 25%. So here's what I'm gathering from the story. The 200,000 is actually the final amount. That's the final value of the land after he put his 25% profit. So what we don't know is how many riyals did he pay for his plot. Let's say the original. And as usual, since I don't know it, I'm just going to call it X for now. That's what we're looking for. How much did he pay originally? And remember, they're saying that he made 25% profit. So whatever he paid for, we need to increase it by 25%, and he ended up with 200,000. So let's find the multiplier for increasing by 25%. Now 25% as a decimal. What's that? That's 25 over 100. That means you just have to move the decimal point 2 times. Gives you 0.25. And as for my multiplier, since I'm increasing the original value, right, he made a profit, I would say 1 plus 0.25. So that gives me 1.25 as my multiplier. That means x times 1.25 gives you 200,000. How can I find x? Well, that goes back to the algebra, right? If I'm trying to isolate x and it's being multiplied by 1.25, what I have to do is undo this multiplication. And as we saw, to undo a multiplication, you divide. And this jealous guy says, me too, and you have to divide by the exact same thing. Now, how do I know if I have to divide by 1.25 or by 200,000? You're trying to undo this multiplication, right? So you have to divide by 1.25 because that's the one you're trying to undo. And there you are. Now we know that x is equal to 200,000 divided by 1.25. And now what we have to do is carry out the division. So let me give myself a little bit of room here. Okay, there you are. So when you're doing a division, you're dividing these decimals. So let's learn a little bit about that. When you're dividing decimals, the best way you want to do this is to turn them into non-decimals. So this 1.25, how can I turn it into a non-decimal? I want an equivalent fraction that is not a decimal. And what you have to do, since it has 2 decimal points, I'm going to multiply it by 100. And to keep the value of this fraction the same, I just have to multiply the top by the exact same thing. As long as you're multiplying or dividing the top and the bottom of a fraction by the same amount, they end up being exactly the same. So 1.25 times 100, I move my decimal point twice, it becomes 125. Whereas 200,000 times 100, I add 2 more zeros, if you will, and this actually becomes 20 million. And what I'm saying is that 200,000 divided by 1.25 is the exact same thing as 20 million divided by 125. And this we can do using our standard division, long division or short division, whatever you like. So here's 125, here's 20 million. I'm going to be very careful with my zeros. There they are. Okay. Now, how many times does 125 fit into 2? It doesn't. Into 20, it doesn't. Into 200, yes, it does fit into 200 one time. And 125 times 1, that's 125. What I'm left with here, if I do the subtraction, the 1 goes over here. He borrows another 1. That's 10 minus 5, 5. 9 minus 2 is 7. And the 1 and the 1 give you 0. And now this 0 will come down. Here we go. 750. Now how many times does 125 go into 750? Let me see. It goes in there. Here I can write the multiples of 125. It's 125, then 250, then 375, and then 500, and then 625, and then look at that, 750. So it looks like it goes in there exactly 6 times. So 6, 125 times 6, that's 750 that we are subtracting, and you end up with 0. You bring that 0 down, and you do the same thing again. It does not fit in there, so that's a 0. You bring that 0 down, so you see we're going to have a couple of zeros here. You'll get 0 again, because it doesn't fit in there. You bring that 0 down, it's going to be 0, and then there's one more 0 there. So I'll save you the trouble of doing all these zeros because I'm running out of space. But what it is 160,000. That is the original value, which makes the correct answer C. So just to check and just to kind of round off your understanding here, hopefully, basically I'm saying that he bought it for 160,000, and if he puts a 25% profit on it, it gives you indeed 200,000. And if you want to do this like a mental check, 25% is a quarter. 25% is a quarter. And a quarter of 160,000 is very similar to a quarter of 16. It's 40,000. Instead of being 4 for 16, it's 40,000. And of course, if you add these two, you would get your 200,000 back. So that's just kind of a mental check that you can do for yourself if you're comfortable enough with saying 25% is a quarter. Otherwise, you know, take it from me and take it from this equation. It's 160,000. So good job for Badr and his profit. Okay, lovely. We get to practice our 3-step equations. This one says, if 9x plus 2 equals 2x plus 9, what is the value of x? So let's write this down. 9x plus 2 equals 2x plus 9. Now the name of the game is getting x all alone, and we're going to do that using inverse operations. First step you want to do is you want to join the x's together on one side. I recommend always take the fewer x term to the bigger x term. And since this is a positive 2x, right, he's not a negative 2x, he's a positive, to undo him, I will subtract 2x. And of course, this jealous left side says, me too, me too, me too. You have to give it the exact same thing. Now, 2x minus 2x, that's just 0. So what I'm left with on the right side is just 9. And here on the left side, what do you have? You have 9x minus 2x. Now recall, these are like terms. These are like apples because it's the exact same letter, exact same exponent. So you can do 9 apples minus 2 apples. Of course, that gives you 7 apples plus 2. The 2 is still there. Now that we have all the x's on the left side, we want to work on the numbers. We want to get all the numbers on the right side. So he's already on the right. But this guy's got to go. Since he's a positive 2, what I'm going to do is subtract 2. Jealous side says me too, and he gets a negative 2 also. So positive 2 minus 2, again, that's just 0. That cancels out. What I have remaining on the left side is 7x, and on the right I have 9 minus 2, and that's 7. Now for the final step, we've seen this before. 7 times x. To undo a multiplication, I have to divide. So I divide by 7 on both sides. Always do the same on both sides. Now multiplying by 7 and dividing by 7, that just undoes both of them. They undo each other. I'm left with x is equal to 7 divided by 7, and that's equal to 1. Now before you go celebrate, you need to check yourself. You need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And here's how you do this. This is the original, right? The original was 9x plus 2 is supposed to equal 2x plus 9. Let's see if our answer, if I put this instead of x, is it actually going to equate? Is the left going to be equal to the right? If I'm correct, then it's supposed to. It should. So let's see. If x were 1, like we're claiming, that means 9 times 1 plus 2 is supposed to be equal to 2 times 1, right? Wherever your eyes see x, you're substituting the value that you found. So let's see if this is true. 9 times 1 is 9. And 2 times 1 is 2. So is 9 plus 2 equal to 2 plus 9? Yes, it is. Since the left side is equal to the right side, that's great. They equate. You got the right answer, and that would be D. Okay. Again, if you're not comfortable with this, please check out our earlier videos. I think they're really great. They got some very positive feedback, and I think it'll be very helpful for you. Let's do the last question here. Okay, we got a little statistics here. It says the average of the numbers p, 12, 18, and 16 is equal to 15. What is the value of p? I believe what they mean is the mean. We don't say the average when you're doing this one. The mean is one type of average, but we call it the mean. And this one is always the same. It's the sum of all values divided by the number of values that you're adding up. So for example, we have 4 values, so we're going to add them up and we're going to divide by 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's supposed to give us 15 according to this scenario. So let's see. 15 is equal to the sum of all the values. So you have p plus 12 plus 18 plus 16, and we're supposed to divide this by 4. So let's tidy up the top a little bit here. How can we add all these numbers? If you want to do, we'll do it on the side here. So 12 plus 18 plus 16, how much is that? So 2 plus 8, that's 10, plus 6, that's 16. So you can't write 16 here, you put 6 and you have to carry the 1 up. So 1, 1, 1, 1, that's just 4. So we have 46 up here. So I'm just gonna change it a little bit here. 15 equals p plus 46 divided by 4. Now I mentioned this several times, that multiplication and division, they undo each other. So remember, we're trying to figure out what p is, right? What I want to do here then is get rid of the 46 and get rid of the 4. The first thing you want to do is get rid of the 4. And you do that by multiplying by 4. Why multiply? Because he's dividing. And to undo a division, you have to multiply. Of course, the jealous left sibling says, me too, me too, me too. And he gets a times 4 as well. 4 and 4 undo each other. I'm going to go up here for the sake of space. Now I have 15 times 4. What's 15 times 4? We can do that up here as well. 15 times 4 is 4 times 5. That's 20. 4 times 1 would be 4, and you put the 2 with it, you get 60. And again, if you feel like trying the mental math, for 15 it works nice to break it up into 4 times 10, which we know is 40, and 4 times 5, which you usually know, the 5 times table, that's just 20. Also, 4 times 5 is always half of 4 times 10. In any case, you get 60. So, what we have on the left is 60. And on the right, I have P plus 46 that remains. Now, I'm trying to get P alone, so I want to get rid of plus 46. 46 is adding to P. So what I have to do to undo it is minus 46. You always do the opposite. You always do the inverse operation. So 46 minus 46, well, that's just 0. And I get P remaining on the right side. What do I have on the left? 60 minus 46. In case you're not sure, you can do it like this. 0 can't afford to subtract 6. So he has to borrow from his neighbor. He says, hey 6, can you give me a 1? And the 6 is always friendly, and he says yes. Now you have 10. 10 minus 6, that's 4. 5 minus 4, that's just 1. And so there is your answer, ladies and gentlemen. P is equal to 14. And of course we can check. We can do a quick check. If I had 14 added to 12, added to 18, added to 16, and I divide by 4, does it in fact give me 15? Let's see. Quickest way to add this, you add these two together because 12 and 18, the 8 and the 2 make 10. This one gives you 30. 14 and 16, that's an easy one as well. That's 30 because 4 and 6 make 10, and you have the other two 10s. So all that you have on top is 60, and 60 divided by 4 is in fact 15, thus assuring me that my answer is correct. So the answer would be C. P is 14. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you found it very helpful. We're going to be posting a new video very soon, so make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so that you get notified when we drop one. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, stuff you want me to do videos about, like maybe some division or some multiplication tricks, things like that, please leave a comment and I'll definitely check it out and hopefully connect with you guys. Looking forward to the next one. See you there.